Good afternoon, everyone. How are you all? I see JCAE here. Hi. Good to see colleagues and friends. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We're really privileged in Kansas City to have such good immigration attorneys. We were just talking about that. And we've worked at Johnson County with BJ quite a bit, just on these types of presentations. So we're really glad that BJ is here. To start off, I just want to give you a little heads up about the International and Immigrant Student Services Office. We are in COM 306 across from the Veterans Office, so come visit us. We have supported students from all across the world. Currently, we have 109 countries represented and about almost 1,800 international students. So we have quite a few students here in all visa types. We truly believe that we are stronger as a college, as an institution, as a county, when we have global representation, and also we align with global politics in terms of understanding, and it enhances our classrooms. So we really believe in it. I want to give a big shout out to Miss Jaya. She coordinated all this. She did all the work. She's going to hate me for saying it, but she let me talk and I literally did nothing. So Jaya, you get all the credit. Thank you so much. And so what we did is we had students submit some questions in advance. And so I think BJ has prepared a presentation, but feel free, this is going to be interactive. If you have a specific question or concern, definitely you can raise your hand or talk. But it's transfer day, is that right? So anyway, I want to give a shout out to Truman State University. Woo! Because I went to Truman State, BJ went to Truman State, and Shelly went to Truman State. So we're not wearing Bulldog shirt, but we are very proud of Truman. So go Truman. And if you want to talk about transferring there, you can ask. Okay. Do you want to do your bio? I have your bio printed out. Do you want to talk through a little bit of your background? Okay, but I just want to say we're very lucky as a city to have access to high quality immigration attorneys. I know more rural areas, people really struggle. So we're thankful to have such a good resource and for them to be willing to come and talk through sort of what's going on with immigration, because there is a lot going on. So thank you so much for being here. Go Bulldogs. Yeah.
Go Bulldogs. I think when I was at Truman, I went to maybe one football game, and I actually had a friend on the football team. So my name is BJ. Thank you so much for being here today. We've got Dayton Euro Murray and Samantha Natera there from our office as well, two wonderful, lovely human beings who are also super intelligent, skilled attorneys. So I will have to leave right at 4:30, but these two ladies are able to stick around if there are additional questions that aren't covered in the presentation. And you probably want their answers anyway, if I'm completely honest. So I've been doing immigration law for 12, 13 years, give or take. And so it's been a little bit of a roller coaster through some changes that we've seen, public rhetoric changes that we've seen kind of come and go. It is a wonderful, wonderful job. I love being an immigration attorney. I love being able to come alongside people as they pursue personal goals, professional goals, that you all have sacrificed everything for, left families, left communities, left culture, left ways of life, left comfort foods, sacrificed tens of thousands of dollars to travel to the other side of the world. And to be able to be a part of that is incredibly special. And so I really love the work that we do. We're going to go through some stuff today, but like Kim said, please feel free to raise your hand or just shout out, interrupt. If you don't interrupt me, you won't get a word in. So please interrupt me. But as we go through, I've got to figure here we go. So this is just kind of a cheesy graph just to show the ways of coming to the United States. On this half of the wheel, you have U.S. citizens. You can acquire citizenship from birth. You can be a derivative citizenship, meaning one or both of your parents are citizens. And even though you might have been born abroad, if you meet certain qualifying factors, you might be a derivative citizen. And then you can go through the process to become naturalized. So those are kind of the three paths to become citizens. And then we have, the word up here is aliens, foreign nationals I like better, foreign-born residents, are folks who are living in the United States either temporarily or permanently, either with permission or without permission. And so we'll also get into some of the terminology real quick, just to kind of orient us. Non-immigrant returns to foreign-born individuals living in the United States on a temporary basis. So think of your F1 students, your J1 exchange visitors, even your H-1B specialty occupation workers. There's a host of non-immigrant individuals who are here with the government's permission, who are here temporarily. And then you have immigrants. Immigrants are people who are now permanent residents of the United States. They either started off as non-immigrants and transitioned, or they arrived to the United States as an immigrant, having a permanent residency when they arrived. Visas are the documents inside your passport that a U.S. embassy or consulate gives you. The visa dictates how you enter the United States. It does not dictate how long you're allowed to stay. It does not dictate your status for the duration of your stay. You could enter on an F1 visa that's valid for 5 years. You can change from F1 to H1B. You do not need to get a new visa stamp to change to H1B. You can change from F1 to H1B, and you can become a permanent resident, all while only having that one visa from the one entry. So visas do not dictate how long you're allowed to stay. They don't dictate how you're allowed to remain in the US. That's dictated by your status. If you enter as an F1 student, you have an F1 visa stamp in your passport, and that is your status inside the United States until one of two things happen. Well, one of three things. The first is you file a change of status. You found an employer to sponsor you. You want to be an H-1B. You are changing your status from F1 to H-1B, or other statuses, a B1 or a J1, etc. The second way that you no longer are in F1 status is if you leave the United States and you re-enter in a different status. That would require a different visa stamp, but then you re-enter the United States in a different status. And the third way you would enter on an F1 visa but no longer be in F1 status is if you just stop doing what you're supposed to do. You drop out of school, you violate the terms of your visa in a way that removes the underlying status. So that, when we say status, that's what we're talking about as what allows you to remain inside the United States lawfully. And then the I-94 is the document that CBP gives you. It's an electronic update now that dictates how long you're able to stay in the United States in lawful status. So if you enter the United States on an F1 visa stamp, that is your non-immigrant F1 visa, you enter in F1 status, and your I-94 dictates how long you stay. So for F1s, CBP always issues a D/S. It stands for duration of status. And what that means is as long as you do what you're supposed to do in F1 status, you get to stay. So you could, come start your degree at Johnson County. You could transfer to Truman State University, wonderful university, lovely town of Kirksville, Missouri. You could then go get a master's degree or a doctorate degree. You could be a professional student, and as long as you continue to do that, you can stay in the United States without having to renew. Oops. Move too fast. So that's kind of the basic. You'll hear me use some of these words, but that's the basis of what we're talking about. So to come to the United States, you can come based on family-based immigration, meaning you have a qualifying relative to sponsor you. You can come through humanitarian means, meaning you have some sort of a humanitarian crisis where the United States has said, yeah, we understand that's a challenge. You're allowed to stay and remain so that you can be safe, or so that you can be healthy, or so that you can find a way to support yourself. There's also employment-based immigration, which is where an employer sponsors you to come work in a specific position. And then finally, there's the diversity lottery visa. For family-based, it is a common misconception that anyone that you're related to can sponsor you. The qualifying relatives for family-based sponsorship are fairly narrow. You can sponsor your US citizen can sponsor their parent, their spouse, their child, their sibling. Permanent residents can sponsor their children or their spouses, and that's it. No aunts, no cousins, no grandparents, uncles, just those qualifying relationships. So in order to, we got it here specifically, but in order to file, the very first thing you do is you file an I-130 with USCIS that establishes the relationship. So if it's a marriage, you show this is a legitimate marriage. We really love each other. We're joining our lives together. Finances, we're cohabitating, we're holding ourselves out to the public as spouses. And so there's a ton of paperwork you submit to show all of those things, including, of course, a valid marriage certificate from where you got married. U.S. Immigration Service recognizes a marriage that is legal where the marriage occurred. So the government does recognize same-sex marriages as long as the place where the marriage occurred, a same-sex marriage was lawful. But otherwise, they don't recognize polygamous marriages, so you do only allowed to be married to one person. And it does need to be a bona fide relationship. Now that being said, a typical marriage relationship in the U.S. is not the definition that the government uses for bona fide. Arranged marriages are permitted because those are legitimate marriages. That is a thing that is valid in many parts of the world. So you just have to show that it is a valid marriage based on a bona fide relationship. You do not have to show that it looks like every Instagram couple in the United States. That would be a disaster. This thing is super clicky. So once you file the I-130 to establish the relationship, the next step you're able to take if there is a visa available. And that's a complicated formula dictated by the Department of State. The easiest thing to remember is that for immediate relatives, that's spouses, parents of U.S. citizens, spouses, parents, and children of U.S. citizen, children under the age of 21. There's always a visa available. So you don't have to wait in those categories. But if you're talking about permanent residents sponsoring anyone, if you're talking about U.S. citizens sponsoring their adult children or sponsoring their siblings, there's a significant wait. And so you cannot move to these next steps until there's a visa available. If you're inside the United States, you can file, it's called an adjustment of status. You become a permanent resident inside the United States. If you're outside the United States, you go through the consulate, they issue a visa, you have to do an interview. If you're going through this process, or if you're interested in going through a process, talk to an attorney to say, hey, what makes sense for my situation? And they'll kind of give you the expected timelines, the cost considerations, the steps that you need to go through, because it does vary pretty dramatically based, first of all, on the qualifying relationship and then also the particular circumstances. You will see, if you can see these numbers, when I talk about a visa not being immediately available and there is a wait, the wait can be significant. You'll see up here, we have China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines. Those are 4 countries where there has historically been a high rate of migration to the United States in these family-based categories. And the visas available, these permanent resident visas available, are limited. They're numerically limited, and then they're further limited by country of birth. So for countries where there are historically high rates of migration to the United States, there is a significant backlog. So for example, if you're a U.S. citizen and you're looking to sponsor a sibling and your country of birth is Mexico, the sibling's country of birth is Mexico, the government is currently processing applications that were filed in February of 2001. So it is a significant wait. I often tell people, sure, go ahead and file the I-130, but also work on something else because it's going to be a long time. The same is true for other categories as well, but I always just kind of look at the siblings of, because that's a very common thing. We have folks who come to the States, who pursue their degree, they become citizens, and they want to bring their extended family. And it's just not a quick process. For humanitarian, we also have temporary and we have permanent. Temporary is the very first one. It's called temporary protected status. It is where there is something that has happened in your home country that the U.S. government has determined your home country cannot accept you right now. There's either financial instability, there is disaster-related issues occurring, there is security issues that are preventing you from returning. So for example, Haiti and Nepal were both put on the temporary protected status list because of earthquakes. El Salvador has been on the temporary protected status list for decades because of instability in the country and the lack of financial resources to reabsorb their country nationals. And so every country is dictated under TPS for certain reasons, for a certain period of time, and the government looks at it regularly to say, have country conditions approved? If yes, they remove TPS, it's no longer an option. If country conditions remain in a questionable or challenging state, they'll extend TPS. TPS allows you the lawful permission to remain in the United States. It allows you to seek work authorization as well, but it is limited by the country, and you do need to be inside the United States when TPS is declared. If TPS, for example, if you know someone from Venezuela, Venezuela is on the list, but if they were not inside the United States when Venezuela was declared, they're not going to be available for TPS. Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, it's called DACA. It is a program that the courts have enjoined new applications, but if you've previously been granted DACA, you're able to continue to renew in 2-year increments. It's the government's recognition that there is a generation of individuals who were brought as young children by their parents to the United States who don't have status. And the government has recognized, look, we've got to provide something for you that makes sense. So we will allow you to remain. DACA itself is not a status. So when we talk about that thing that allows you to remain in the United States being a status, it's not a status, but what this deferred action means is that the government knows technically you weren't supposed to be here, but you're here and we want you to stay, so we are going to defer taking action to remove you from the United States. So it's not permanent. That's why you're always hearing about permanency for dreamers. How can we make this a more sustainable option? But that's DACA. And then we also have a form of deferred action for labor violations. None of these by themselves allow for a path to permanency. I'm sorry. I got to take my hand off this. None of these by themselves allow for a path to permanent residency, but they all do in one way or another allow limited opportunities for work authorization that you can renew. I should have had like an instructional class on how to use this. I apologize. Humanitarian options that allow for permanency if approved. The first one is asylum. Asylum is where you have a well-founded fear of persecution based on a protected group that prevents you from returning to your home country. You have to file within a year of entering the United States or within a year of some sort of changed condition. That means that you now have a very well-founded fear of persecution upon your return. You are allowed to apply for work authorization while you wait for your case to be adjudicated, but this is not a quick path. Asylum cases linger for 7, 8, 10 years with the government, so you can continue extending while you wait, but it's this constant state of not knowing whether or not you have a permanent option here. And it's also generally not well suited for countrywide conditions. If your country is unstable or unsafe, you will not receive a grant of asylum if you cannot show specific persecution against you because of one of these protected groups. The Cuban Adjustment Act is a path to permanency for certain Cuban citizens and certain Cuban nationals that have entered the United States on parole that allows them a path for permanent residency. And then, I didn't even touch it that time. And then U visas and T visas. U visas are for victims of crime. You do need to be willing to aid law enforcement in the persecution and investigation of the crime. And you also need to be a victim of a qualifying crime. And so I always, when folks come to talk and they think they might have a valid U claim, I always tell them it's good news that you don't have a valid U claim, because they're usually really awful crimes. And so the U visa is an amazing option for individuals who have been victims, but I just don't want anyone to be harmed. So, but then T visas is also for victims of human trafficking as well. So there are paths to permanency based on someone harming you, taking advantage of you, trafficking you, etc. And then we've got employment-based. And so employment-based is what we deal with most often in our office. We typically work with individuals. I'd say our most common client is an individual who's come to the United States to study a degree program at a university, at a college, and then they want to understand, how can I stay? I'm getting a degree, I've obtained a degree, how do I stay in the United States? And the answer, usually, is to find an employer to sponsor you. And so there's a whole host of temporary non-immigrant visas. We'll go through them one by one. I'll try to be quick because but if you see something and you have questions, again, raise your hand. So the typical path that we see in our office is that someone enters on an F1 and they are obtaining a degree, they're going to a university, they're taking classes. Once they graduate, they found an employer to sponsor them. Every single F1 student has 12 months of OPT available to them upon graduation. That does not require an act of an employer to sponsor you. That's available as part of your degree program. If you then want to remain beyond that 12 months, most often people try to find an H-1B employer. And then from the H-1B, you can springboard into permanent residency. So the most common path that we see at our office is going to be F1 to H-1B, but I'll talk through all of these options. The B1 visitor. This is what we most often see for international companies where they have someone abroad that needs to enter the United States temporarily to negotiate contracts, to identify action items for work to be done abroad, to do training. So the B1 requires that the individual remain on foreign payroll and they cannot perform any productive work. Kind of the seminal B1 explanation of work that's permitted is a case of a Chinese tailor. He came to the United States, he was a clothing maker, he came to the United States to take orders and to take measurements. He did so on the B1 visitor visa that was permitted. He then returned to China and actually made the garments. And so that's kind of the distinction. He came here to meet with clients, to take orders, to understand what was needed, and then the actual work was done back home in China. So that's typically what we think of when we think of a B1. They are limited. You usually only get 6 months at a time. You are permitted to request extensions, but those are usually pretty limited. You've got to show a change in circumstances or a reason why I didn't realize I was going to need more than 6 months, but here we are. I do. Can you please extend? Again, it's only permissible to extend if you can meet if you're within these requirements. For F1s, you all have OPT available. OPT is optional practical training that is related to your degree program. It allows you kind of that experiential, hands-on learning that is ideally complementary to the studies that you're pursuing at your university, at your college. OPT is limited for bachelor degree programs that are, in most degree programs. I was a business major. I would have had 12 months of OPT, and that would have been it. But individuals with STEM degrees, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, they're eligible for an additional 24 months of OPT, giving you 36 months total. And if you're looking for that H-1B employer, the 36 months total is really important for reasons that we'll talk about in just a minute. But it gives you an opportunity to remain, to expand upon your degree program, and to really put your scholastic education into practical practice in a way that starts your career in the United States. There are some degree programs that allow for, oh yes, sir?
I know that you need in order to sponsor your career, would you at least need to have found a job or not?
Yeah, so what typically happens is that the DSO is required to update your SEVA student record. So once you've identified an employer, you need to chat with the DSO. The expectation is that once your OPT is approved, you only have 90 days of unemployment for a 12-month program. And so the expectation is that within 90 days, you have an employer updated on file with the university for your I-20. But you're correct, the employer doesn't need to sponsor you. Did you want to add to that? Did I see your hand?
Oh, I was just going to say, typically you do need to have a bachelor's.
Yeah.
And so that's really important for JCCC students, is we would encourage you to continue to advance so you're eligible for sponsorship. Not
Very
for
key
OPT,
point.
OPT at every level, but
Yeah.
sponsorship at a bachelor's level or higher.
Yep, thank you. For the STEM extension, I've already moved past the slide, but for the STEM extension, that 24-month extension, your employer does not sponsor you, but your employer signs a training agreement that goes on file with the government. So they're not sponsoring you for it, but they are showing the government, yep, it's an additional 24 months. Here's how we are going to guide their work, oversee their work, review their work, making sure that it's truly a training program as opposed to, you know, you're out on your own. And for the STEM, it's also got to be an E-Verify employer. CPT is something that schools may offer as a complement to your degree program, meaning the school has identified that certain courses are enhanced by side-by-side experiential learning. And so they will offer CPT work authorization for a certain period during the program because it is an integral part of the degree program. So we see folks utilize CPT a lot as well to work while they're in school. And then for the H-1B, as Kim noted, the H-1B is specific to positions that require a minimum of a bachelor's degree in a specific specialty. So again, I was a business major. I am not an ideal H-1B candidate because the government views H-1Bs, or the government views business majors as overly generalized. We get a very general education that allows us to pop into specific positions, but the positions that we pop into don't require the specialized, theoretical, practical application of a specific subset. So a business major, I was not well positioned for an H-1B, but if I would have taken my business major and focused in on accounting, that would have better positioned me for an H-1B. H-1Bs require the degree be specialized, and that specialty must be directly related to the position. So if I was an accounting major going to work at Starbucks, that is not an H-1B position. If I was an engineer major, I'm a civil engineer, and I've decided that I want to go work at a civil engineering firm working on roadway design engineering, great, that's an H-1B. And so it's really important to make sure that the degree itself requires the bachelor's degree and that you have the degree related. Now let's look again at that engineer. Let's say that I am an engineer, I have a civil engineer degree, I want to go work at a roadway transportation firm, but they're hiring me in as an intern, and the intern position does not require a degree. It doesn't matter if I have one, the position itself does not require one, that is not an H-1B. So you always want to make sure that the position requires a bachelor's degree and that you have the required degree in the specific specialty. H-1Bs are valid for 6 years total. They're issued in 3-year increments. And for most countries, 6 years is all they need because most individuals start the H-1B process and then springboard it to permanent residency. And before they complete a full 6 years in H-1B, they have their permanent residency in hand. The countries that does not apply to is India and China. And the reason why, and it's country of birth. So if you were born in India or China, you are going to have a longer wait. And again, the reason is that the number of employment-based visas are restricted numerically, and no single country can receive more than a certain percentage of visas on any given year. So for countries where there's historically higher rates of migration to the United States in these skilled worker categories, there's simply a backlog. There's a lot of people waiting in line. So what I tell clients right now, I'm not a mathematician, I'm not a statistician. It is a shot in the dark, but if you're born in China, I tell you it's probably 5 to 10 years from starting the process until you have the green card in hand. If you're born in India, it's closer to 25, maybe. It's a challenge to predict because there's a lot of that's the appropriate face. Why is our system so broken? But that's exactly what it is. And there's a lot of factors that go into why those numbers don't move very much for Indian and Chinese-born nationals. But the good news is that once you reach a certain part in the green card process, you're no longer bound to those 6 years. You can continue extending and living inside the United States for as long as possible until you get your green card. I just had a client issued a green card a couple weeks ago who was born in India. She graduated university, I believe, in 2004. She got her first H-1B in 2008. Started the green card process, and finally got her green card in 2024. And so that was about a 20-year path, an Indian-born foreign national. We're just seeing the trends lengthen, unfortunately. Okay. H-1Bs are wonderful. If you can get an H-1B, please do so. They're very numerically restricted in a way, to be candid, that does not make sense given our employment needs in this country. The H-1Bs are numerically restricted to 85,000 total, and 20,000 of those are specifically reserved for individuals with a master's degree from a U.S. institution. So what happens every year is that there is a lottery. Employers register their employees under this lottery. It happens in March of every year. And at the end of the lottery, the government draws people to say, hey, congratulations, you've been selected in the lottery. You now have the opportunity to file for an H-1B. Being selected in the lottery does not mean that you get the H-1B. It means you have the opportunity to file. So I don't know if you can see all of these numbers, but in 2025, so the fiscal year starts on October 1st, so we are currently inside USCIS's 2025 fiscal year. For the 2025 fiscal year, the government had almost 480,000 applicants for the 85,000 visas that are available. So if you remember earlier, when I said that 3 years of OPT, if you've got STEM, that 3 years is really important. It allows you to continue working while you continue to try to apply for the lottery. And again, that is a frustrating aspect. I do have one client who has been in the lottery now for 5 years, and he still has not been selected. And it's frustrating. It's demoralizing, and it is simply a numbers game. There is nothing you can do to put yourself in a better position for the H-1B other than to obtain a master's degree from a university, a U.S. university, or enter as early as possible, as often as possible. So how we advise our employers sometimes want to make sure that before they invest financially in an H-1B, they want to make sure it's a good fit. Is it a good relationship? Is the employee performing? Are we getting along well? Is it a good team fit? And so they ask, do I need to apply for an H-1B right now, or can I wait? And we always tell them, please do it now. Please do it now, because if it works out, you will wish that you tried as early and as often to get an H-1B for this person. If it doesn't work out, it is a nominal investment that it's a cost of doing business, and the risk of missing the opportunity is so much more dramatically painful than that cost of doing business. So when the H-1B cap is reached, There's a couple of options for individuals. So if you haven't yet applied for your OPT, you can do the OPT STEM extension. If you haven't applied for the STEM extension, you can do the STEM extension. We do have individuals, my guy who's been in the H-1B lottery for 5 years, he is out of his OPT, he's out of his OPT STEM extension. So what he has done is he is re-enrolled in another degree program. He's getting his second master's degree in a field that is directly related to his work, and that second master's degree views CPT as an integral component of the classwork for the entirety of the degree. So he is pursuing a full-time degree as a full-time student, and he's also working full-time at his company until he can get another shot in the H-1B lottery. So that's an option. There are certain other work visas available based on country of birth. So we have treaties with individuals, treaties with Mexico and Canada for certain positions to work on the TN visa. Chile and Singapore and Australia also have availability very similar to the H-1B for individuals born in those countries. O1s are kind of the Justin Biebers of the world. You're just super great and wonderful at what you do, but that's available. And then J1 exchange visitors, but if you're already here, likely the J1 is not the best option. And then the final thing, this question did pop up, is I'm on an F1, I'm not allowed to have immigrant intent. How do I start working towards remaining inside the United States? And so this final thing here says start a perm case. And a perm case is you have an employer who's sponsoring you, who wants to find a way for you to become a permanent resident. The perm process, we can talk about here in a little bit, it allows employers to sponsor you permanently if they can prove there's no U.S. qualified workers who are capable of doing the duties of the job. It is tricky, the timing of things, but what is key to know about immigrant intent is what is your intent when you entered the country, or what was your intent when you filed for the benefit requested. If you are an F1 student, if you came to the United States knowing I'm going to enter as an F1 student and 3 weeks later I'm going to marry a U.S. citizen and file for permanent residency, that's a violation of non-immigrant intent. You will get in trouble for that. But if you enter as an F1 student and you've lucked out on the H-1B lottery, but you have a job, you have a community, you want to remain, talk to your employer about talk to your employer about sponsoring a perm application for you, because that allows you to stay and it's not a violation of your intent because you didn't have the intent to do that when you entered. So it's tricky. You have to be strategic, but it is possible to go through a permanent residency application while you are an F1 student. Yes, sir. No, if you buy what type of property? No, nope. No, you're allowed to invest. You're allowed to purchase homes because that doesn't indicate that you are living here permanently. Even H-1Bs, well, H-1Bs are a bad example because they're allowed to have that dual intent, but there's no requirement that if you buy a house, that means, well, I'm living here forever. Some people buy houses because they don't want to rent. And it just makes financial sense knowing I'm going to live here for 2 years and then I'm going to move on. I'm going to sell the house and move on. So buying a house is not an indication of immigrant intent, but that's a good question. Yes, ma'am. Can you buy a house with what? Yes, ma'am. Yep. Yeah. Now, I say that the lending institutions, if you do not pay cash for the house, you might run into trouble with banks. You might run into trouble with the mortgage companies. So it is permitted under U.S. immigration law to purchase property. I can't promise it'll be easy. I do know a lot of banks want to see a social security number before they enter into any sort of agreement with you. And if you haven't yet been approved for work authorization, you won't have applied for a social security number yet. So there might be some hoops to jump through with the institutions that would be financing the purchase of the home, but otherwise it is possible. Yeah. Okay, anything else? Yes, ma'am?
How common is it, like in Kansas, for them employers to sponsor?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question. There are some employers who every single day, it is a part of how they grow their business. It's a part of how they gain a competitive advantage because they see the value in the immigrant community. Other employers are not opposed to it. They just don't know where to start. And so sometimes even asking that question of, have you ever sponsored before? Is it something you're interested in? Some employers will say, yes, but we don't even know where to start. And then there are some employers who won't. And so sometimes you might see in a job posting online, sponsorship is not available for this position. Some employers make it clear. Others won't make it clear, but you may not get a call back. Most employment applications have two questions. Are you currently authorized to work in the United States? And do you now or will you in the future need employer sponsorship? And some employers, if you answer those questions in a way that indicates sponsorship is required, they'll knock you out. They won't look at the resume. And so that's a really frustrating aspect, but that's also common practice. But you might be able to Google what employers in Kansas sponsor for work visa sponsorship. You might be able to ask around with some folks. You might call up recruiters if you can. I don't know if you can get a hold of recruiters directly, but if you call up, hey, who's someone nearby? Garmin. Hey, Garmin, I'm interested in applying for a job. Do you all sponsor? If so, what positions do you sponsor? Because some employers may sponsor, but they may not sponsor for every position. I used to work for a tech company, and we only sponsored software engineers, senior software engineers, software architects, and data scientists. 4 positions in the entire company. So some might be limited in what they sponsor, even if they do sponsor as a whole. I'll give a side note to plug an organization that is not here in Kansas City, but there's an organization in Springfield, Missouri called Purpose Connect, and I love what they are doing because they are partnering with students who are interested in finding employers who sponsor, and they host career fairs. To specifically connect students with employers who know that they want to sponsor but don't know where to start. And so then they bring in immigration attorneys to just provide free consultations to say, hey, let me answer any questions you have about what you need to do. And sometimes it's just removing that hurdle. So Purpose Connect, they're located in Springfield, but I know the woman who founded the organization. I'm confident she will be happy to answer your questions as well about how do I get employers to notice me if they're not willing to sponsor. She is incredibly passionate about bringing foreign-born talent to employers who are open to the opportunity. They just don't know what to do. And I think sometimes that's really what it is more than anything. Employers are open to the opportunity, but it feels so daunting. They don't know where to start, and so they just don't. And so what I typically tell folks is if a student contacts me directly and says, hey, I need an H-1B, can you tell me what I need to do? I always respond with, I'm happy to talk with you, but I need your employer on the phone too, because I need to know that your employer understands the process. It is an employer-driven process. They're signing off on everything. They have the obligations for wages and whatnot. So sometimes that is the biggest challenge of just getting the employer to understand there are some steps you have to take, but they're not hard. Let us help you. Yes, sir. Are there conditions for the company to sponsor? So what the company is required to do is show that they are offering terms of employment that are consistent with what they're offering to U.S. workers. So in terms of pay, in terms of benefits being offered, hours being required, the process of a U.S. employer sponsoring an H-1B requires the company to prove to the government, we're not trying to hire foreign workers to take advantage of them. We're not trying to hire foreign workers to undercut U.S. wages. We are paying everyone the same. We're offering the same benefits. But they do have to file paperwork. And so usually The paperwork aspect of the H-1B is about a 3 to 4 week process, give or take. But that's largely dependent on how responsive people are. And it's also assuming that there's a visa available. So for the H-1B, if you haven't been selected in the lottery, then there's no paperwork to fill out. But if you've been selected in the lottery, or if you're changing employers, for the H-1B, just because an employer sponsors you, you're not required to stay with that employer. You can very easily transfer your H-1B to a different employer. And I think that's important for everyone to know. If your employer makes you feel like you cannot change, if your employer certainly if they ask to have your passport and hold on to your passport, and there's significant red flags. You are entitled to the same protections as U.S. workers, the same offerings as U.S. workers. They're not permitted to hold sponsorship over your head, and sponsorship does not also mean that you are contractually obligated to remain at the employer. So there's certain things that you kind of want to keep a lookout for. If an employer is asking something of you and you're like, this feels weird, I don't like this, listen to that and go talk to an immigration attorney, because then maybe you're eligible for a T visa, especially if they've held onto your passport for any reason. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So the H-1B itself, so if you're talking about a criminal mistake, a criminal violation, H-1B does not ask any questions about have you ever been charged with a crime, have you ever been cited. They do biometrics when you enter the country, and they do biometrics when you apply for permanent residency, biometrics for certain humanitarian applications. But for the H-1B, they don't do biometrics. And so they're not running your fingerprints, and there's no questions on the forms of have you ever been cited, convicted, charged, arrested, etc. That's inside the United States. Anytime you are outside the United States and applying to enter, those questions are on the visa application forms. So if you've committed a crime, if you've been charged with something, if you've been arrested before you leave the United States, talk to an immigration attorney, specifically an immigration attorney who is well-versed in criminal charges, to know what the impact is before you re-enter. There might be some things that would prevent you from being able to re-enter the United States. Our firm does not do a lot. It's called crimmigration. It is a very specific area of the law. Our firm does not do a lot of that, but two firms off the top of my head in town that do are the Sharma Crawfords. They're amazing crimmigration attorneys at helping protect individuals who have made mistakes and helping to figure out what the right path forward is. You also want to talk to an immigration attorney before you sign anything in the court that is charging you. So if you've been charged with something and you're going to, plead no contest, and as a part of the plea, you're stipulating to a few charges, but still pleading no contest or not guilty, talk to an immigration attorney before you sign, because how those agreements are worded might still impact your immigration proceedings, even if you're not guilty. So those are really important things. Anytime you have any sort of interaction with law enforcement, make sure you talk to an immigration attorney before you finalize whatever the issue is, so that they can tell you, is it going to impact your immigration opportunities in the future? And if so, how can you approach the court proceeding to prevent that from happening? Immigration attorneys that are skilled in this area will even help draft language for your criminal attorney to put into the agreement. So the Sharma Crawfords are great. And then right down the road from us, she's lovely, and I'm blanking on her name, Nancy Olivares. She's a lovely human being. She is incredibly skilled in crimmigration issues as well. So keep that in the back of your mind. If you ever find yourself in contact with law enforcement, it can be scary, it can be panicky, and it can be, I want to get it taken care of as soon as possible. Let's get this done and move on. Don't panic. Talk to an immigration attorney to make sure that you're not getting it done in a way that will impact future opportunities. But if you're inside the United States and you're changing status to H-1B, that stuff should not come up on the application. Where it would come into play is if you're inside the United States and you want to go visit family and you need to come back. That's where you might run into issues. Good question. Okay. These are some ideas of people who may not be subject to the numerical limitations. If you've ever been in H-1B visa status before, you probably aren't subject, so talk to an attorney to see if you're again subject to the cap. If you're already in H-1B status and you're extending or amending, you're likely not going to be subject to the cap. And if you are currently working, a lot of times when people aren't selected in the lottery, we had another individual this year, he wasn't selected in the lottery, he was about to run out of OPT. So he went to a university and he got a position as an adjunct professor at a university. It was 1 class a week. They filed a part-time H-1B visa for him, and because that visa was cap exempt, his employer was able to file a concurrent visa for him. And so it allowed him to continue working for his employer that would typically be cap subject in a way that allowed him to continue. He also taught classes in a university, and then he was selected in the H-1B lottery. So he's just transitioned now to a individual who is on H-1B. He's been counted against the cap. He no longer needs to keep working for the university. So there are some ways to get creative out there. We've really had to get creative because the numbers are not in our favor. So always go talk to most immigration attorneys. Will charge a consultation fee, but it's not overly significant. So, it's never fun to pay money. But if it helps you find ways to stay in the United States, if it helps you think about different ways to be creative in finding employment, go talk to an immigration attorney. Kim and I were chatting earlier. Kansas City has an amazing group of immigration attorneys. We are one firm of many, and they are so dedicated, intelligent, compassionate professionals who are very well equipped to help with whatever your immigration needs may be. So please contact an attorney. In the Kansas City area, we do not have any bad actors in the immigration space. But make sure you are talking to an attorney. There are individuals out there who will present themselves as immigration document experts, as immigration form experts, as notarios. And so make sure that you are talking to an attorney. Kind of a good rule of thumb is if you can see a diploma or a license on the wall, that's helpful. It's not always indicative, but it's helpful. The H1, B1, and the E3 are the H1B. It is the same requirement, same process. It's specific to Australia, Chile, and Singapore. So those are basically the same thing. There are some nuances, but they're basically the same opportunities, the same requirements. The major difference is they all have numerical limitations and they are never met. Knock on wood, there's always visas available in these categories. Visas are also always available for TNs. TNs are specific to individuals from China and Mexico. Canada and Mexico, excuse me, specific to individuals from Canada and Mexico. They are limited to specific occupations. So it is not like the H-1B where you simply have to show that the job requires a bachelor's degree and the bachelor's degree that you have is in a specific specialty directly related to the job. There's a list of occupations, and if it doesn't matter if you have a degree, it doesn't matter if the job requires a degree, if it's not on that list, you cannot do the TN. But the TNs are wonderful. They're renewable in 3-year increments. There's no limitations. Yes, sir. A citizen. Yep. Yeah, we because the backlogs from India are so significant, we actually have a lot of Indian-born citizens who have been able to get permanent residency in Canada and then citizenship in Canada. They have a Canadian passport, and then they come to the U.S. on the TN. that doesn't help with the green card backlog because the green card is based on country of birth. It is not based on country of citizenship. So you're still tied to the significant waiting periods based on where you were born. But it does help get you into the United States. I've got a lot of clients, surprisingly, who got tired of waiting in the United States, went to Canada, became a permanent resident, became a citizen, and then came back on the TN. Yes, sir.
Would a bachelor's in finance work for H-1B?
Usually, I would want to understand exactly what the job requires. So sometimes individuals with bachelor's degree in finances, they might look at a bookkeeping position, and across the board, most bookkeeping positions don't require a bachelor's degree. So even though it might be related to your degree, if the position itself doesn't require a bachelor's degree, it doesn't matter that you have a specific degree. The USCIS looks at how the Department of Labor identifies occupations. And so we see this a lot with nurses, for example, registered nurses. Most individuals in the United States who are registered nurses, they have a bachelor's degree in nursing. Most hospitals do not require a bachelor's degree in nursing. So it is incredibly challenging to get an H-1B for nurses for that very reason, because the government says it doesn't matter what you have, it doesn't matter what this hospital says they require. Most hospitals don't require a nursing degree. So when you look at job postings, most job postings, if you're on a job search website, it'll say the job title, the name of the employer, the location. It'll give a description of the job duties, and then it'll list the requirements. And if the requirements are, for example, a 4-year degree and must be a good team player, that's not an H-1B position, because even though it requires a bachelor's degree, it's not specific. You have to show that the duties of the job require a specialized skill set. They require a specialized focused training for you to be able to perform the duties of the job.
So it requires a bachelor's, it doesn't work, it requires a bachelor's in finance.
Yep. It will work if we have to show that there's a true link. So sometimes we have employers say, okay, well, I'll say it requires a bachelor's in finance so we can do the H-1B. But if that's not the true hiring practice, or if that's not the industry standard for that position, you're still going to have trouble with the H-1B. So it really does have to be not just your employer's requirement, but what the standard is across the board. Well, how we know is we go to the DOL database. There is a DOL database called the ONET. If you just Google ONET, it'll pop up a DOL database, and it contains every occupational classification under the sun. There's thousands of occupational classifications that the DOL has identified as typical duties, typical entry requirements, skill sets, etc., for jobs. On that ONET, you will know if the position typically requires an H-1B or not, if the position typically requires a bachelor's degree, if it's labeled a job zone 4 or a job zone 5. So what I typically tell people, because sometimes employers will say, well, I don't know, what occupation is this? When you pull up the ONET database, in the upper right-hand corner, thank you. It's a hard word. On the upper right-hand corner, there's a free text box where you just type in words related to the job description. And so electrical engineer, you just type in electrical engineer. It'll pull up related occupations that it thinks you're looking for based on the words that you typed in. And you can click through those and you can see which one is related, which one isn't. And when you're inside that job description, so you've typed in electrical engineer, you see electrical engineer pop up, you click on that. So you're inside that, you see the duties, the skills, the tasks. Just control find for the words job zone. And as long as it says job zone 4 or job zone 5, that's going to be an H-1B position. That's how we tell. It's super not complicated. but you do have to know that. And sometimes employers will give you job descriptions, and you look at it and you're like, I'm sorry, it's not an H-1B. And employers who are committed to the employee, who have some movement in that job description, will work with them to better identify a job that does qualify. You have to be very careful that you are identifying the accurate job duties that you will have the person perform. You don't tweak stuff just so that it does qualify. If you tweak it on paper and you submit it to the government, that must be what actually happens. But sometimes employers will call and they'll say, hey, we're really committed to John. How do we make this work? What position do we need to put him in? We'll brainstorm to see what makes sense, and then the employer then commits, okay, this is the position we will have him do, these are the duties, this is the wage that we will pay, and that's how you can find an H-1B. That's a good question. Okay. The L1 is probably not super applicable to most of the folks in this room. It is for intra-company transferees. So you're already working abroad for a company that has a sister organization in the United States, and you want to come work in the United States in an executive capacity, in a multinational manager capacity, or in a specialized knowledge. Keep this in mind if you do return to your home country and you start your career there. If you work at a multinational firm, there's always an opportunity to come back on the L1. And the L1 also provides a path to green card. The O1, as I talked about, that is the Justin Biebers of the world. It is the Grammy artists. It's the Nobel Prize winners. It is for individuals who are extraordinary, the O1. H-2As and H-2Bs, again, probably not going to apply to most of the folks in this room, but it's for temporary positions that are seasonal in nature or based on peak load demand. So seasonal would be landscaping artists, ski lift operators, summer camp counselors. Peak load would be a retail store during the Christmas season. Super challenging, super limited, not fun, probably don't apply to you, but if you are interested in the H-2B, I will refer you to someone who can who can talk to you about them. H-3 trainees are specific to employers who are looking to bring folks to the United States for training purposes. There's knowledge here in the United States that they need to operate their business abroad, so they bring folks, they train. It's the government really wants to see an educational setup, a classroom, identified agenda, coursework, training program, etc. The J1, again, likely not applicable to you all, but it's for, study abroad, exchange. I was looking for the word exchange, cultural exchange visitors coming to study or to do internships and get that work experience. So that's the non-immigrant visa conversation. Do you guys have any questions about that before we turn to what it takes to become a permanent resident through employment-based sponsorship? Yes, sir.
Just want to make sure about the H-1B, like it should be in your major.
Yeah. It needs to be directly related to your major. Now, sometimes there can be a variety. So I once had a biotechnical engineer qualify. His degree was biotechnical engineering, but he obtained an H-1B for software engineering. And what we were able to show is that even though the focus was on this biomedical aspect, he still had a significant core component of engineering style classes that trained him for the software engineering component of the degree of the work. So it doesn't have to be I have a degree in civil engineering. I am working as a civil engineer. It doesn't have to match word for word, but you do need to be able to draw the link between the two to show in my coursework, my degree programs directly prepared me for these tasks because I gained these skills and I learned these programs, and that's why the degree is related to the job. Good question. Yeah. Okay, so green card. You found an employer, they want to sponsor you, you want to stay and live indefinitely. The green card requires U.S. employers to test the labor market. What I tell folks is that the idea of the H-1B or the TN or the, whatever we all just talked about, it's temporary. The government wants you to work and then return home. And through the green card process, the employer says to the government, hold on, if you make this employee return home, there's no US workers. We need them to stay indefinitely. Can you please give them permanent residency? In order to say that, you actually have to test the labor market and give US workers an opportunity to apply. So it's a 3-step process. The first step is that test of the labor market with the Department of Labor. It's highly regulated, it's highly annoying, but it proves that there are no US workers. This process right now is taking about 26 months, so it is not a quick and easy process, but it is the required first step for green card. Once you get that approved, you submit that certification to USCIS to say, well, the employer submits it saying, we've identified there's no US workers. We have identified a foreign worker who is qualified, willing, and available. Can we please reserve an immigrant visa? That's the I-140. And then once the I-140 is approved, and once there is an immigrant visa available, so again, for most countries in the world, it's going to be fairly quick. Indian-born nationals, China-born nationals, this is where the wait really begins. These first 2 steps right now are accomplished about 26, 28 months. And then for most folks, you can move into stage 3 there pretty quickly. But for India and China-born nationals, there could be a 10, 15, 20-year wait between steps 2 and 3. Other opportunities to obtain green card through employment-based is, again, individuals of extraordinary ability. The Justin Biebers, I don't know why he's my go-to today, but he is. Outstanding researchers, individuals who are really accomplished in their fields. They're moving the conversation forward in their area of research. And then national interest waivers. We've seen a ton of national interest waivers in the last couple of years of individuals performing work that is so integral to the US interest, public health, public safety, transportation, infrastructure, that it is deemed in the national interest to bring a foreign worker here to do the work permanently, even if there are US workers. For these, you do not have to test the labor market. You simply fill out the paperwork. It's not simple, but you fill out the paperwork, submit it to the government to prove, yes, I'm extraordinary. Yes, I'm outstanding. Yes, my work is imperative to the national interest. And then the diversity lottery visa. The diversity lottery visa is limited numerically, as all visas are. There's 50,000 available every year. They are subject to a true lottery that happens usually in October of every year. Usually you find out around May if you were selected in the lottery. And then if you were selected, you need to move quickly. Because again, just because you are selected, it does not mean that you are given the opportunity to enter the United States as a permanent resident. You really do have to move quickly to make sure that you get the visa before the visa numbers run out and before the new fiscal year starts. So when you go through the process, the government gives you a strict timeline. You need to follow that as urgently as possible. There are some requirements. When we talked earlier about that job zone 4 or 5, applicants either need to have the equivalency of a high school diploma and higher, or they need to have 2 years of relevant work experience in a job zone 4 or a job zone 5 occupation. Okay, yes, sir.
Since we're getting the preference, it's the agreement that was ready to go back home after that. If we apply for this reason, is it a violation?
No, because the diversity lottery requires you to go through the Department of State. And so again, the question is, what is your intent when you enter the United States? You enter as an F1 student, you have non-immigrant intent, you're here to study. If you win the diversity lottery and you're given the opportunity, you are required to go through the Department of State, which requires you to leave and re-enter. On that entry, you have immigrant intent because you're entering as an immigrant. And so there's no prohibition against. When we talk about immigrant intent, the question is, when is that intent identified to the department, to the government? So when you enter as an F1 student, you can go through the PERM process. You can spend 26 months moving through the PERM process without the government knowing that you have immigrant intent. When you file the I-130, That's what tells the government you have immigrant intent. So at that point, you might have trouble traveling abroad. You might not. That's why I say talk to an immigration attorney. If the immigration attorney files the I-140 for consular processing, you have a valid argument of, I'm not staying inside the United States to become an immigrant. I will leave. I will process my immigrant visa at a consulate, and then I will re-enter as an immigrant. And so there's valid arguments there that you can do as much as possible as an F1 student and have immigrant intent and not have that prohibit you from continuing as a student. But it's important to talk to an immigration attorney specifically about your circumstance. I think that's a key thing I haven't mentioned yet. Immigration is incredibly individualized. It is incredibly fact specific. As you've seen, it can even vary based on your country of birth. So please, please, please do not believe Reddit applies to your individual circumstance. Please do talk to an immigration attorney. Again, make sure that they're an actual attorney. But there's a lot of great ones in Kansas City. There's a lot of services in Kansas City that provide low bono, pro bono, or if you do need to pay a consultation, our firm charges $100 for consultation. Sometimes it can be $200, $300, just depending on the firm. Please talk to an immigration attorney because they can talk you through your exact situation. Where are you in your F1 student status? What are you thinking about? What are your goals? What are your plans? They can pull out that individual specific information that then gives them more specific guidance for you specifically. So, internet is wonderful, but do not rely on the internet for immigration advice, please, because it will be, we could have 5 cases for the same employer, for the same job, for people from the same country and have 5 different timelines, different income, or different outcomes, different strategies. So, yes, sir.
I would like love to work for the TV company as an student.
Yeah.
And if we get selected, we have to go back home to do the process, or
You have to go back home to do the process. They're counted at with any lottery, the count happens with the registration, but the government over selects, and that visa isn't actually counted until you apply for it at a consulate abroad. So that's why I say start working on it as immediately as possible. Talk to an immigration attorney immediately to see what you need to do to take advantage of that opportunity. Yes, ma'am.
Where does that consulate have to be?
So that's a great question. Typically, the government wants you to process any sort of visa request at the consulate that has jurisdiction over your home residence. That's not always possible. There are certain countries where there are not functioning consulates right now. For those countries, there are designated they're called third country processing consulates. So you can go to that consulate. For example, Iraq does not have a designated functioning consulate right now, so you've got to go through Turkey. Based on your home, yeah, based on where your passport is from and based on your home country. No, that's okay. No, please do, yeah.
So you have permanent residence in one country, Canada, but you're a citizen of another country, Uzbekistan. Does that mean you have to apply for, go through the consulate in Uzbekistan or in Canada?
Usually not. You can probably do both. I say usually and probably because it does come down to the consulate. Some consulates are regularly open to what's called third country processing. So let's say you don't even have permanent residency in Canada. You've got a Uzbekistan passport, Uzbekistan citizenship, but you don't want to travel. You just want to go to Canada, get a visa, and come back. Sometimes Canada allows for that. You don't have to have permanent residency or home ties there. But I say sometimes because it really does ebb and flow based on...
If you have permanent residence, you're good.
You should be. Yeah, you should be. Yeah, you should be. The other caution that I give folks when thinking about third country processing is that you might get stuck. abroad. So if you do go to a third country, we sometimes see folks go to Mexico to process. They want to go on a beach vacation. They'll go process a visa while they're there. There is a chance you could get stuck abroad. I had a client once get stuck in Canada for 6 weeks, and he lived out a hotel for 6 weeks. So that's obviously unexpected travel expenses. Consulates do what's called administrative processing, and that's where your application for a visa kind of goes into a black hole, and you don't know why. They don't give you much information, and it could be something as simple as you have a same or similar name to someone that they're doing security looking into. It could be that they're interested in some of your coursework and they want to make sure that your biochemical engineering courses are not enabling you to produce harmful devices. So there could be a whole host of reasons for administrative processing, but there's no way to make it move faster, and the consulate doesn't care that you're living out of a hotel. So I always say be careful when you're talking about third country processing of the visas for those reasons. But good question.
And be careful with like diversity. We've seen scams with diversity lottery. Be very careful. Not here. I had a student who paid $3,000 to someone who was helping him, and it was a scam. So just be really careful.
Yes. This is a lot like healthcare, where you will be your own best advocate. So please, you guys are wonderful for being here, for asking questions, for doing your own research. Again, don't rely on the research you find online, but it's so important to be your own best advocate. And if something doesn't feel right, if it doesn't sit right, if it is like, listen to your intuition. Unfortunately, there are bad actors who are in the immigration space who will take advantage of you. There are bad actors who will call you pretending to be USCIS, demanding that if you don't pay them money, they will deport you. The government will not call you. Full stop. The government will not call you. Even if you beg them to, they will not call you. So if anyone ever calls you claiming to be ICE or CBP or the DOL or USCIS, hang up immediately and call an immigration attorney. If you're working with an immigration attorney and they know of something going on with your case, they might say, oh my gosh, I asked USCIS to call me, not you. Let me call them. I'll handle it. Because it does happen every so once in a while, USCIS will call an accredited representative. But again, do not trust it. Hang up immediately and verify with someone in the immigration space. Okay, we have an election coming up. I don't know if anyone has heard. It is, yeah. Now, I am just going to be direct and honest. I obviously have a dog in this fight, and I care about immigrants. So I am not unbiased with what I'm about to present. For the interest of immigrants, for the interest of diversity, for the interest of compassion for different walks of life, there is one choice in the election, but there are two candidates. So I'll give you an overview real quick on the candidates' proposed policies in immigration. Kamala Harris is, she's worked to get a bipartisan bill passed through Congress that will do a couple of things. Kind of the hot ticket item right now is the border. Secure the border, stop the mass migration. She has proposed certain policies that would increase funding to help patrol the border, to help make sure people who appear at the border are properly processed. She has proposed to increase funding to detention facilities, which sounds gross, but it's actually good because they're not very well staffed. They're not super healthy conditions and environments. So if we are going to detain people, that's a separate conversation, but if we are going to, it should be well funded. She's also proposed increased funding to help process asylum claims and to detect the improper, any sort of transport of fentanyl products into the United States. She's also proposed legislation to help provide legal counsel for unaccompanied children. In a court of criminal law, you are, under the law, afforded an attorney even if you cannot afford one. That is not true in immigration. If you cannot afford an attorney, you do not have an attorney. And that is the same for children who are caught being transported across the border or coming across. And so, you know, folks 3, 6, 10 years old in immigration court not being afforded counsel. So she's proposed providing funding for counsel for unaccompanied minors. She also wants to increase the standard for asylum eligibility, provide a fast track review of asylum applications. Like I said, right now that can take 7 to 10 years. And folks are able to remain inside the United States and seek work authorization while they're in the process, but she would like to provide fast track options to kind of combat the catch and release terminology that you hear in the political realm. Granting permanent residence to individuals who aided the U.S. efforts in Afghanistan before we pulled our troops out, increase the number of employment-based and family-based green cards. That would help with those significant backlogs we've been talking about. And then also create the means for the president to shut down the border if necessary when there's overwhelming influx. Any questions about Kamala before I talk about Donald Trump's policies? No? Oops. Let's just go to something great. Let's look at a photo. Let's not talk about Trump. Trump has painted a bleak picture for immigrants and immigrant policies. He has promised he will utilize the military and the National Guard to implement mass deportation. He will increase workplace raids through ICE. He will obviously reignite construction of the wall and build more detention facilities to detain children and families. He wants to overturn a settlement that requires detainment of children be short-term and also requires humane conditions. He wants to overturn that settlement. He looks to circumvent the due process of migrants under international law. What is happening at the border is the lawful way. It is lawful to come to the border of a country and to ask for protection. He wants to circumvent that. He wants to reignite the Remain in Mexico policy. He wants to establish safe third country agreements where essentially that would redirect asylum applicants to another country that's agreed to host them there while they seek asylum there. He would like to end birthright citizenship for children of undocumented individuals. He wants to deport and revoke the visas of pro-Palestinian student protesters. He wants to revoke all humanitarian parole and end TPS. He wants to implement a refugee ban. He wants to impose ideological screening, political rescreening, religious screening for visa applicants. Reinstate, you might have heard during the COVID era, the Muslim ban, restricting visas of certain countries. He claims based on health concerns, security concerns, questionable his true intent there. He wants to terminate work permits for asylum seekers, make housing unavailable for certain unqualifying individuals. And then the one good thing, the one good thing that is interesting to students is that he would like to propose an automatic green card for non-citizen graduates of U.S. universities and colleges. It sounds like an amazing thing. It cannot be done without an act of Congress. So he can make all the promises he wants. It will not happen without Congress acting. So that's Donald Trump. Again, obviously I'm biased. That's not hidden. Yeah. But I also I didn't make up these words. These are his proposals. So his proposals on their face are bleak. I also did not paint, Kamala, she's going to be tough on the border. She's going to be tough on asylum seekers. She's going to be tough on trying to make sure that we're reducing some of the strain that we're seeing right now for those reasons. I also think she's going to be common sense in how she approaches increasing numbers of visas available to reduce backlog, to expedite applications. So that's us. I talked the entire time. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
So, in my position, I work with, I handle pretty much like all like the Spanish-speaking callers,
Mm-hmm.
and with like the callers don't necessarily know their immigration status, because it feels like unless it comes up, it feels kind of like a task.
Right.
But I do get a lot of people that have like professional degrees and stuff in their home country, and because I am in the continuing education department, it is relevant stuff, but I feel kind of stuck in how I can guide them
Yeah.
in a way that's not like strictly. It feels like a lot of it is designed to be like, oh, you're not from here, okay, go do GD, ESL, good luck.
Right.
And that's just not realistic for a lot of them when they are trying to seek work. They're
Right.
trying to finish their courses.
Yeah. That's a great challenge. There are community-based organizations. So do you feel uncomfortable asking some questions that might help you better? Like, are you here lawfully? Are you in the United States? Are you employed? Do you feel uncomfortable asking some of those questions?
Not necessarily, and I'm still learning to that decision.
Yeah.
But I do want to be a better advocate with
Yeah.
my position.
Yeah.
And as someone who just a lot of these Spanish speaking
Yeah.
trust me.
Yeah.
I feel bad not having the answers.
Yeah. So there are organizations that you can direct them to. Mission Adelante down in Wyandotte County, El Centro, Mattie Rhodes, Della Lamb, Avenue of Life, Catholic Charities. Yeah. I'm absolutely forgetting some, but there are wonderful organizations that are well equipped to deal with a Spanish-speaking population that's blended. They might have family members that are documented, might have family members that aren't, might have family members that are educated, able to work, might have family members that aren't. So those organizations are well equipped to kind of respond to those community needs that go beyond education needs. So I would kind of pull together a list of referrals of here are certain things that I cannot help you with, but here's and all of those places that I listed off are all in the downtown area. Olathe has a significant Spanish-speaking population, so I'm confident there are organizations in Olathe that I just don't know about. But there's a whole host of organizations that can help provide kind of those wraparound services of not just employment, not just housing, not just clothing, not just food, but just the whole kit and caboodle. Yeah. Good luck. It's important work. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Does your for an F1, I wouldn't think so. So I can't answer that question definitively because there's a lot I don't know about you. But for F1s, you should be able to re-enter the country on an F1 visa stamp. Does your J1 visa, does it have a 2-year home residency requirement? Were you an au pair? No, okay. On your visa stamp, on your J1 visa stamp, or on your DS 2019, it'll say whether you are subject to, I think it's section 212E. Yeah, thank you. Whether you are subject to section 212E or whether you're not. And if you are subject to section 212E, the expectation is that you return to your home country for 2 years before coming to the United States to work or immigrate. The F1, Kim, the F1, you can still do F1s without fulfilling. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, so right now you're fine as an F1. If you want to change to H1B, if you want to change to a path for permanency, you need to find out whether or not you're subject to that 2-year ban. If you are subject, you either return to your home country for 2 years, and then you come back and you can enter in whatever visa status you're eligible for, Or you could potentially request a waiver of that 2-year home residency requirement, and you would need to talk to an immigration attorney about that. Depending on the country, depending on the conditions, depending on your reasoning for the waiver, there's certain different options that you can take. So you'll talk to an immigration attorney specifically about that. Yeah, you're welcome.